Kia ora koutou. My name is Simon McManus and I'm the Executive Officer from ITS New Zealand. We're the peak body for ITS, that's Intelligent Transportation Systems, and basically tech-enabled solutions for transport. Very happy to host today's webinar. I'll start off with just a little introduction to us. We are a member-based organisation with just over 50 members. You can take a look there. We've got a number of members from both consulting side, technology suppliers, government as well, and academia. We host informative events and webinars such as today's webinar throughout the year. And we also host our annual conference, which is the TTEC conference. This year's conference coming up in just a few weeks' time at the University of Auckland. And you'll be able to join us there where we're unpicking a number of different topic areas. We'll have over 50 speakers, which you can find on the website as well. It's a little glimpse of who the exhibitors are. We've also got an exhibition and obviously networking and events around the conference as well. So moving on to today's webinar, we're looking at end-to-end road corridor management. And we're joined by some great speakers today. The webinar is really brought about by the understanding that to deliver on New Zealand's growing infrastructure needs efficiently, safely, and with minimal disruption to communities means getting on top of the challenges that we face, such as poor coordination or sequencing of works, utilities strikes, disparate data sets and systems, and the need to align these with changing future needs as well. So we'll be discussing what good end-to-end road corridor management looks like, and how it enables all stakeholders to plan and operate more efficiently, more cost-effectively, importantly, and of course safely. It will show what end-to-end road corridor management can look like and how we get there. Some of the presentations we'll hear today will include some case studies and user stories from some of the organisations that are using these tools. So our speakers today, we're joined firstly by Mike Steer, and I'll be passing over to Mike shortly. Mike is the Head of Growth and Partnerships at Open Plan. And then Mike will be passing to Angus, who is the founder of Open Plan. Open Plan developed and manages the Forward Works Viewer and the Underground Assets Register on behalf of Digital Built Aotearoa. Then Nick Miskelly will be joining us, and Nick is the Manager of Stakeholder and Consenting Acquisitions at Chorus, but today he is here wearing his New Zealand Utilities Advisory Group hat. And finally, then we have Tracy Bacan, who is the Group Manager of Road Corridor Access and Coordination at Auckland Transport, and she'll be sharing her experience with using some of the tools that are available. So without further ado, my part done. I'll be joining you again at the end for the Q&A session. I'm going to hand over to Mike.
Thank you very much, Simon. Hopefully everyone's seeing my screen there now. Hey, look, good afternoon to you all. It's a real privilege to have your time and attention for this lunchtime session on end-to-end road corridor management. Look, I'm just going to speak for just a few minutes here. And what I want to do really is just to set the scene for what this discussion today is about. I think it's fair to say that we have across the board acknowledgement in New Zealand that we need to deliver infrastructure more efficiently. We also have this enormous and growing infrastructure deficit, which is obviously going to put more strain on that system, and it only heightens the importance of efficient delivery of infrastructure. Now that makes today's discussion extra important and also very timely. So what the discussion is really about is about how the relationships and the collaboration between all the different stakeholders who work in the road corridor impacts the efficient outcomes that we want to see. So it's about those relationships and about the collaboration between those groups. So we'll touch on issues such as Simon mentioned, around optimal sequencing, about sharing data, about how we get data from siloed systems which currently exist, and about how we share our plans together to make these things run more efficiently and improve these outcomes for the system as a whole. Now, currently, a lot of these relationships are mostly transactional. They're often siloed within individual parts of that infrastructure lifecycle or corridor management process. So when we talk about end-to-end corridor management, this is about both a technology and a mindset shift that will move us towards a more collaborative and cooperative relationships going forward. And it's in this area where, in our experience at OpenPlan, we've seen significant efficiency gains can be unlocked. And so you're going to hear more about that today from Angus and our other speakers. Now, before I hand over to Angus, I just want to quickly highlight a few of the key challenges which really create a drag on infrastructure delivery, and which will be solved as we make this transition towards this more integrated end-to-end approach. So these challenges include, firstly, the cost and time impact of poor works coordination or sequencing. This is the classic case of when a road is going to be resealed, for example, scheduling or sequencing the works to be doing the digging before that reseal is going to happen. And obviously that is driven by good collaboration. We've also got the huge number of service strikes still occurring in New Zealand. I know Nick's going to be touching on that and talking about that in more detail later on. But having over 10,000 of these strikes each year is a massive cost and also a massive dent in terms of the efficiency that our services are able to operate in. We've also got this challenge of siloed data, which I just mentioned. And this is, when you look at this at a system level, this is a really big challenge to overcome, because across all the councils, the different organizations operating in this ecosystem, we've got diverse systems, we've got different formats of data and different organizations to try and bring this together. So this is a major challenge that which we're looking to solve through this process. Then we have this mixed level of understanding of risk as we go through the corridor management process. It's something that which is obviously under attention right now with the transition to the NZGTTM, but this is certainly an important area which this overall process of end-to-end corridor management looks to focus on as well. Then we have our road controlling authorities, which are very busy, and under the code of practice, they have got a huge number of responsibilities in addition to their day-to-day work around coordination and making sure the smooth operation of works in the road corridor. So one of the questions we have to encounter is, how can we make that much easier for our RCAs to manage this overall process? And then last but not least, we've talked about all these different existing challenges, but while we're solving these, we also need to be thinking about what are the coming challenges where we can play a role in that too. What is it which impacts the real-time view of road networks, for example? Or what is the type of data we need to be fitting into the needs for connected and automated vehicles? Okay, look, I've raised enough questions there, I think. So let's get some answers from our speakers. I'm going to hand over to the founder and CEO of OpenPlan, Angus Barge. Now, OpenPlan manages the NZ Full Works Viewer and the NZ Underground Asset Register under the stewardship of the charitable trust called Digital Built Aotearoa. Over to you, Angus.
Thank you, Mike. So let's start with a story. 2016, November the 14th, we had the Kaikoura earthquake, and that closed State Highway 1, both north and south of Kaikoura. Now, within a few hours of that event, if you jumped on Google Maps, you would see that the route from Christchurch to Kaikoura, and indeed from Kaikoura to Picton, was closed as a result of that event. If we jump forward a month and a day later, on the 15th of December 2016, through a Herculean effort of the contractors involved, that route south of Kaikoura was actually reopened to traffic. And you could actually get from Christchurch to Kaikoura. But it took Google a further 3 or 4 months until April 2017 before you as a user could query their maps and see that that route from Christchurch to Kaikoura was actually available to traffic. And that meant that there were people arriving at the airport in Christchurch wanting to go and watch some whales off the coast of Kaikoura, who were told that that route was no longer available. And there was a real and meaningful impact on the, I believe, on the economy of Kaikoura in a time when they much needed it, as a result of our reliance on systems that really didn't work or talk to each other. So this isn't a finger pointing exercise, but clearly there is in some way a failure in the way that we reported information on our corridors, which fed through to the systems that we rely on. And just incidentally, if you compare that to our experience after the Christchurch earthquake, we had a mechanism where we would publish our planned roadworks data publicly, and that was actually consumed by the various mapping applications around and quickly showed up in their applications. So difference in approach when we published something publicly and how it was consumed by the industry. We'll just move on to another New Zealand story. We obviously heard from Mike about the infrastructure deficit, and we believe there's about $120 billion of planned investment in the next 10 or 15 years in that horizontal infrastructure space. If we look at NZTA's network, they're targeting over 3,000 lane kilometres of resealing annually. So the point here is that when we look at the next 10 years in New Zealand, in Aotearoa, there will be no such thing as a normal network condition. Our network will never be operating under a stable state. It'll be under a continual amount of disruption. We could argue that just in the way that you survey the economic vibrancy of a city by the number of cranes that are visible on the landscape, maybe we could say the same is true of traffic cones on our roads, that economic vibrancy can be measured by the number of traffic cones we have deployed. But that's maybe another controversial topic for another time. I'm certainly not advocating for that. But let's jump in and let's say when we talk about end-to-end corridor management, what are we actually talking about as a concept? So if we just run through things quickly, I think we're talking about the holistic coordination of planned works and events in the road corridor, comprehensive knowledge about the assets and the utilities that are both above and below ground, those things that we're going to encounter when we work in that environment. And then enabling and facilitating and indeed being aware of all the coordination and discussion between stakeholders. And of course, last but not least, the awareness of what our current operating conditions of our corridors are. If we look at those 4 bullet points, what we're really saying there is we're looking for an approach which captures information and data on all events and activities, both current and future, all the assets that are present in our road corridor, and all the interactions that occur between various parties. And those interactions could be organization to organization, but they also could be thing to thing as well. They could be census to organization. It doesn't necessarily have to be constrained, but again, it's a collaborative opening of information and data, seeking to mimic the end-to-end nature of both event management, whether that be planned roadworks, and also infrastructure delivery. So, of course, the aim there is to optimize delivery and reduce disruption, to protect our assets, and of course, make sure that there's a safe operating environment for both the traveling public and people who have to work on our roads. If we just jump forward to show you an example of what we mean, if we consider how work is currently planned across our network, I would say that typically 80 to 90% of the planning that we do is in that 1 month reactive space before works is deployed on the network. And yet we have this huge opportunity when information about what is planned on the road corridor exists in systems of record with organizations months and years and potentially decades before that work actually happens or occurs. So the question here from an end-to-end corridor management perspective is, how do we unlock that information which is in those systems and enable the parties that hold that information to collaborate meaningfully so that at the time it comes to actually deploy that work, all the collaboration, the optimization is done. We're not reacting in that month before the work's deployed. We're actually doing that in a very sequence, with a high degree of methodology when we do that. If we consider the systems that are currently there to support the delivery of works in the corridor, we can see that there's a number of systems that currently play in that space. You'll be familiar with some of these badges on the screen. And just a nod to these providers, these systems are becoming more open and collaborative and talking to each other in various ways. But the question, I guess, here is, what would it look like for systems that we employ in the road corridor management space, whether they be asset-driven or event-driven, to be open by default, and that be a baseline demand from us from the sector saying, hey, things have to be open. So if we just jump next slide, if we can, if we look, say, well, actually, what would be the characteristics of end-to-end road corridor management if we were to say, okay, how if we were defining systems and processes and interactions, what would that be? So we're talking about here, which is something which is a whole of system approach, again, mimics the the life cycle of asset planning and delivery, but also mimics the life cycle of in-corridor works and events. It's collaborative, not transactional, so we're not always seeking that transactional exchange between parties. We're saying, here's my data. It's obviously standards driven. It's federating data, which for those of you who are unfamiliar with that term, it basically federating data means we're bringing disparate data sources and into a single reference point, maybe a map or something similar, where we can interact with that data as though it's a combined data set. Interoperable, and for those who appreciate that, we're talking a World Wide Web approach, not an operating system, so it's open by default. It wouldn't be captured, but will be delivered for the public good. And by captured, I mean that we're not basically subscribing to systems which effectively are locked down or service a sort of a commercial game primarily, although there's clearly a place for commercial providers in here. And just touching on that point, if we just jump to the next slide, actually, I'll come back to the who part of it, but just to explain about two technologies that Open Plan are involved in on behalf of Digital Built Aotearoa. So the first is the Underground Asset Register launched in Wellington, and a map which federates utility data, subsurface utility data, from disparate organizations into a single reference point on a map for people to interact with. And we'll hear Nick talk briefly about this in his talk in a few minutes' time. And similarly, with the National Forward Works Viewer, is another online map, which in the same way that the Underground Asset Register federates utility data, I don't know if you want to jump to the next slide, Mike, in the same way that the Underground Asset Register federates utility data, this does exactly the same thing, but with planned works information. And again, with these two systems, we can understand who's planning what, where, when, and why, and what the impact of that work is going to be, and then what the utilities they're likely to encounter when they excavate and actually do work in that environment. So again, open, bringing data in from disparate systems of record and displaying it in one easy-to-use interface. As you can see, the Forward Works Viewer is used throughout Aotearoa. There's over 440 organizations either contributing data or consuming that. The rollout model is through an anchor subscriber where an RCA would subscribe and then everybody in that region gets access to it for free. And that's both access to the product, but also loading their data. So when we bring on a utility, the cost of us onboarding them into the system is covered by the RCA subscription. So again, a cost neutral, cost recovery model through a charitable organization. Being Digital Built Aotearoa, which brings us to the who. So I'm sitting at 9 minutes, so I'll just skip through this slide and then hand on to Nick. So we can see that with solutions like the Forward Works Viewer and the Underground Asset Register, where data stewardship is very important in that federated environment, that the who is important. And therefore, part of the reason why Digital Built Aotearoa was established was to manage that. An Open Plan is simply the delegated managing agents for that tools, if that makes sense. I'm going to hand over to Nick now, who will walk you through his presentation.
Thanks, Angus. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak today to the journey the Utility Advisory Group is currently on to achieve better outcomes in the road corridor. I'll take you through a quick background, talk through some of the challenges, and then what we see is needed to get the benefits of the tools discussed. For those of you that are unlucky enough to not to have heard of the National Code of Practice for Utility Operators' Access to Transport Corridors, or more affectionately known as the Code, it is a deemed regulation or secondary legislation, simply meaning those party to it must abide by it. It is the rule book for how utilities and corridor managers work in the road. I've been part of the Utility Advisory Group, or the NZUAG, for over 10 years now. One of our key roles is to review the code every 3 years to ensure it is fit for purpose. So, in advance of the third review in late 2021, we decided that we would try and facilitate a conversation to create awareness of potential shortcomings. We engaged with other key players in our ecosystem, the civil contractors, who agreed to collaborate on a joint initiative to target a shared pain point for the industry, and that's service strikes. So firstly, we looked internationally, and a 2019 report from the Utility Strike Avoidance Group out of the UK highlighted that they had similar challenges, and 3 of their 7 recommendations resonated. They were asset owners to improve quality, accuracy, and access to data, undertakers of works to use the plans more effectively in accordance with industry recognised survey practices, and lastly, any known discrepancies on site to be recorded and shared with the relevant asset owners to improve records. The second focus was to try and understand the ecosystem a bit better, and why numerous previous attempts, including ongoing focuses by Before You Dig in this area, weren't seeing more success or sustainable success. So we set up a reference group as outlined on the slide and surveyed them to gain this understanding. The results pointed to a clear mandate to continue. A smaller subgroup of 20 was pulled together for a facilitated program of 3 workshops over an 8-week period, with the periods in between used to test ideas with a fail fast philosophy to identify where intervention would be most effective. So through that process, the number one recommendation that came out of this work was to increase transparency and access to data. So I suppose the question begs why we don't just change the code and get the outcomes we want. Simple and job done. Unfortunately, changes to the code cannot be enforced retrospectively. Code is also a national code, so we need to be mindful of how changes could affect regionally different areas. And embarrassingly, compliance to the code is not at a place that we could be certain changes would be effective. Then we have the difficulty of the asset data itself. This is owned and managed by utilities. We have all gone on different journeys with how we do this, with different sensitivities on what we will share. This is why the Before You Dig system was so effective when it was first set up. It allowed utilities to share based on their own preferences and capabilities. Currently for Chorus, to find our assets accurately, you need our underground plans, which are effectively a digitised version of the paper records, as the GIS records do not have the same level of accuracy. Most asset owners face this or similar problems. While the capture of more recent infrastructure has improved, we are constrained by our historical data. The code already has obligations on asset owners to update their data if they receive evidence of it being wrongly located. However, this practically is very difficult to achieve due to a number of factors. It is point data, and more data is required if a record is to be updated. The information provided is not given in a compliant format, so the utility deems it untrustworthy. Or the utility requires further funds to make changes, and this can be difficult to cure. And things don't get easier on the other side of the fence. The contractor's procurement models don't include site management of these issues, keeping excavation open or delaying works to allow for utility investigations. And to be honest, actually finding the front door to notify utilities when they come across assets in the wrong place is very difficult. There is very limited support for contractors being proactive in this space. Current system also doesn't allow for construction data gathered in advance or during the works. Contractors doing investigations through potholing or other location methods to improve the quality of the data. If I think about the Chorus UFB build program, there was a point in time where Vision Stream, our build partner, had the most accurate records of utility locations within Auckland. However, as the project closed down, the data is lost. This is common for projects, as most clients are only interested in their own network, or the RCA has no means for holding the information and no ability to fund a system to keep it up to date. So a clear mandate from the industry to instigate change, however, significant challenges that are beyond the ability or influence of the NZUAG to solve. While we were able to make some changes to the code through the review, we cannot solve this larger issue. We don't see the solution as throwing out all the good practice that is currently in place, but seeing how we can improve and add to the ecosystem. which is why we were happy to support the Wellington UAR initiative, as it understood the challenges in this space and they were prepared to test their approach. The NZUAG sees our role as enabling the culture shift in the industry, as well as facilitating a regulatory shift, which will enable more investment and the balancing of the risk when working in the road. We've remained agnostic on corridor management tools. However, we support the need for both FordWorks and utility asset registered tools. Reducing risk is what the UAR should ultimately deliver, improving critical safety outcomes and enabling cost reduction and construction activity. On the other side of the coin, we will see reduction in damage cost to utilities, and those using the utilities will receive a better service. FordWorks tools lead to earlier engagement on projects between parties, which naturally leads to better coordination of works. Often the focus is on large capital projects, but I believe as the system matures and the sharing of information improves, we will see this potential widening into maintenance activities, reducing costs and impacts to the public. Lastly, data. Even in my tenure at Chorus, I've seen significant change in how we're collecting and using underground data. This will continue, and the sooner we have an ability to collect and retain data that isn't held by utility owners, the sooner we will see the culture change and the opportunities that we haven't yet thought of. The last thing I wanted to highlight was the NZUAG's ambition to see zero strikes in 2050. This was a contentious target that came out of the working group, and at the time was to back off the NZTA road to zero. While this initiative has been rejigged, we will continue to report to the Minister on our progress and how we think tools like this are contributing. Thanks. I'll pass over to Tracy.
Oh, good afternoon, everybody. I can say good afternoon now. We're halfway through the lunch hour. I'm going to give you a little bit of a chat about FordWorks Viewer at Auckland Transport. And so before I start with life before the FordWorks Viewer at AT, I thought I would just underpin this talk by the fact that for a road controlling authority, end-to-end corridor management starts with planning. And I don't mean planning how you will construct your work in the road corridor, but much earlier than that. Early works coordination so that applicants to use the road corridor to do their activities can actually interact with each other to resolve any clashes or conflicts. Works coordination at AT has a newish function. It's probably only come to the fore in the last 5 or 6 years in its current format, and it continues to develop over time. I am a little bit ambitious to say that it's flourished over the last few years, but we're not there yet, and we just encourage anyone to get in touch to talk to us early about any significant project they want to do in the road corridor. But one of the tools that's pivotal to our works coordination function is the FordWorks Viewer. So life before the FordWorks Viewer predates my time as Group Manager for Road Corridor Access and Coordination. And I know that some people on this call were actually around at the time. I think I saw Tim Watton's name on the screen before, and I know he was around at the time. So FordWorks Viewer was introduced to Auckland Transport in 2016, and it was immediately used for that ultra-fast broadband rollout that Nick referred to in his examples before. The UFB program was really significant in the past. It actually was not sequenced correctly, and you'll see that little quote down below, much to the dismay of stakeholders, because to be fair, there were fragmented systems, multiple views, and it was really difficult to effectively coordinate works before we had a single source of the truth. So we'll just move on to the realities of the Auckland network. I often get told when I speak at more national events that we shouldn't use Auckland as an example because Auckland is special. But actually, rather than, aside from the city centre being New Zealand's largest metropolitan centre, our network, our over 7,000 kilometres of roads, is actually everybody else's network, just in different pockets of the city. So we've got challenging topography in Auckland, but actually we've got a large active city. We have got the small town centres. If you think of Pukekohe and Warkworth and Wellsford, we've got busy rural connectors with high traffic volumes getting people across the city, quiet suburban streets, low volume country roads, and all of that intersects in our end-to-end corridor management journey. We also have a heavy reliance on the motorways that run through and across Auckland, and so have to work in with NZTA when we're looking at approving certain works on the network. So what that involves is a lot of conversations with a lot of people, and having tools to facilitate that certainly smooths the journey. So benefits. It's easy to understand that coordinated planning saves time and money. I've got a couple of very brief case studies from very early on in our ForwardWorks Viewer journey. When we first put ForwardWorks Viewer in, and I'm thinking pre-COVID here, there was a significant project in Franklin Road where Watercare, Vector, AT and Chorus actually used the combined visibility of each other's works to take a coordinated approach, sharing trenches and temporary traffic management, and saving the city at that time about $460,000. Now, a fair amount of money, and it's always useful to save money, but what was more important was the reputational saving. If these projects had gone independently and in a serial manner, the community would have been disturbed for much, much longer. And the reduction in that stakeholder frustration is really significant. There's also many, many examples of benefits of internal project planning at Auckland Transport. We're a very large organisation, and we've got different parts of AT that want different things of the network. So if you think about coordination between our bus team and our walking and cycling teams, and having the visibility of all of the maintenance activities that are going on our network at any time via ForwardWorks Viewer allows for innovative use of detours and protection of vulnerable road users like pedestrians and cyclists. We had many examples where, especially in several town centres where works intersected, we managed to halve the time of the projects and share temporary traffic management and save significant amounts of money. Before we had the ForwardWorks Viewer, often users had to go to, and I quote here from one of our surveys, 10 different websites to get the information of where or how their project disrupted the network. Now you can go to a centralised place and see where your impact is going to be and who else is working nearby or wants to at the same time. The further refinements that have happened to ForwardWorks Viewer in the last few years, where we've actually looked at the collaboration tools, have meant that now you can actually set yourself an alert. You can draw yourself a geographic boundary, set an alert, and the system will tell you when someone else wants to do something in the space where your project is set for. And this just encourages the opportunity to dig once. We go to the next slide. Thanks, Mike. So how does it all fit together? Well, essentially, it's a single source of the truth. AT uploads its projects directly from our project management system, and that's added to the data that's sourced directly from other principal organisations. Changes in any of the project's timing or location are automatically communicated to stakeholders, and in-system collaboration enables clash detection and coordination much easier than it was in the past. All of this information then informs your eventual corridor access application when it comes to my team. And certainly we have seen that projects that are going to be potentially disruptive, that have been through a thorough works coordination early engagement, really bringing to the fore those 3 C's of the New Zealand Guide to Temporary Traffic Management and the Health and Safety at Work Act, the ability to consult, cooperate and coordinate. Applications that have been through those processes before they come to corridor access request tend to go through the system in a much more seamless way because a lot of those awkward conversations have already been had. It's really the fact that technology only goes so far, and engagement and collaboration are the key. So we at AT and the Works Coordination team like to chat early so that we can get ahead of the curve using the tools that we see developing and becoming more efficient as each month goes by. In the future, as I think Angus mentioned, there will be no lessening in the demand for road space, and we actually will have to work harder to get better coordinated and to save communities this continual digging up of their the roads outside their workplaces, their homes, and their leisure activities. So I think I'm handing back to Simon now to cover the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Excellent presentation. I'll just wrap up a few things before we go to questions with Simon. So to summarise, I guess what we've heard now, we've heard from Angus about what end-to-end road corridor management means and how this is happening in practice. You've heard from Nick, of course, and special mention, Nick is suffering from the flu at the moment, so well done on you on soldiering through. But Nick's talked about the perspective of NZUAG, civil contractors, and how sharing data and collaborating is absolutely a key to solving that challenge of service strikes. And now you've just heard from Tracy about the transformative nature of sharing planned project data for Auckland Transport. So I imagine at this point that some of you will be thinking, okay, but what can my organisation actually do on this front? And how can we make a start towards this integrated end-to-end approach to corridor management? So let me leave you with a few tangible steps that can help you get started. And before I do that, I want to, I guess, highlight how easy this can be with the story of New Plymouth District Council. So New Plymouth is far from our largest or most complex road controlling authority using the Forward Works viewer, but the transformation that they've achieved is a very good example of what is possible with no big IT projects, no massive investment, just rolling out the Forward Works viewer in their region and changing that mindset to drive more collaboration. So before the Forward Works viewer in New Plymouth, they really relied on quarterly meetings, the quarterly liaison meetings, to discuss the projects between the different groups. Their data was not unified and they had little insight into others' plans. Now, fast forward post the rollout, and what you're looking at here is the ecosystem of data which New Plymouth has managed to build up using the Forward Works viewer as its central platform. So on the left-hand side in the light blue, you can see the different types of projects and feeds coming into the Forward Works viewer internally, both on the transport and the Three Waters side. In the dark blue, what you're seeing there is geospatial layers of information from the council's GIS system. So that's things like bus routes or rubbish collection days, interesting and helpful contextual information, which can add really valuable information around risk to your projects when you see your projects in relation to that information set. And then finally on the right, you've got all of the different parties who are either contributing and or consuming data in the Forward Works viewer. So they've done a tremendous job of building up a really healthy ecosystem together with the team at Open Plan. And the feedback from that and the value that they've achieved from that has been fantastic too. So in addition to the cost savings, the feedback internally, their view, so Gordon's mentioning there on the right that they were probably missing about 90% of the opportunities to collaborate before the Forward Works viewer. All of that data is now at their fingertips to be able to use on a day-to-day basis. And then externally from Carl at PowerCo, they are seeing huge benefits from that added collaboration with the council, including cost savings from being able to sequence their work before a reseal, so they had some of that cost passed on to the council. So it's been really a beneficial project for everyone in that environment. So let's leave you with the steps. That's New Plymouth's journey. What is it that you can do locally? Here are some really simple things to get started on this journey. Number one is to establish a unique and lasting ID for your projects. If you have some sort of project management system already, you will probably have these generated automatically. But if you're managing projects in a spreadsheet or similar, then make a unique and lasting ID a part of the data set you keep, because that will be really helpful when it comes to sharing data and maintaining that later on. Secondly, you can conduct an audit of the data sets that you have. So what are the things that you're collecting and have, and which of those could be opened up to industry to help drive collaboration and efficiency for everyone? And that's regardless of whether you're a road controlling authority, whether you're on utilities, or whether you're a contractor. There will definitely be value in you sharing your data into a shared approach. If you're issuing tenders in your organization, look at getting those requirements to actually share planned works into your agreements. That's a really easy way, or a good mechanism, to drive that early sharing of planned works in the local ecosystem. Fourth point, turning those utilities liaison meetings we talked about into a real platform to launch this change. So don't just use that as a box to tick. You can drive this yourselves, of course. Open Plan can actually help facilitate those conversations. We sit in a number of those liaison meetings in different regions. That's one of our key roles under the Charitable Foundation, is to really help facilitate collaboration and to build up these healthy ecosystems of shared data. Now, that's a really important point, because in the last compliance report from the NZUAG about corridor managers' use of those liaison meetings, almost 20% of those who reported back responded that they hadn't had a single liaison meeting in the previous year. So the message here is to do those meetings and to do them well. They're a real opportunity. Fifth point, of course, launch the full works viewer in your local region. Road controlling authorities of all different sizes are using this. It is not hard. As we mentioned before, it's not an IT project. It does not matter what state your data is in. We've got ways of capturing data regardless of that, and it will deliver a really strong business case back to your organization. Now, if you're a utility, a contractor, or designer, you can sign up for free today. You can join in, you can share your data, you can consume what's there. And if you're keen to see it happen in your region, if it's not already there, then your voice can really make a difference towards that. The final thing I'll say before I hand back to you, Simon, is that making a plan is probably just the first simple step you can do to get on this journey. So even if you don't take up any of those other steps we've mentioned, if you do nothing else, put a plan together. You've seen clearly today that an integrated end-to-end approach to corridor management is clearly a best practice, and it's really driving more efficiency in the sector. And we know from the pipeline of different organizations coming through and showing interest that this is set to grow. There is also possibilities in future that aspects of this may well be mandated in future in terms of requirements to do sorts of data sharing or that sort of thing in future. So the message here, I think, is to get prepared, encourage your organization to have a plan around this, and then communicate internally why that's important. You're welcome to contact myself personally, or if you scan the QR code on screen, you can get in touch with our team, and we'll be happy to help you through that planning process, through discussing what's required to get on the forward works viewer, anything really. It's really part of our duty, or part of the role that we play under the Charitable Foundation, is to help facilitate those conversations and help people on this journey. So that's all from me. Simon, I'll leave it over to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Mike. And yeah, very quick thank you to all of our speakers for putting the time in. Some great presentations, very smoothly delivered. And I'm sure we do have some questions coming through. So we'll get into those shortly. First of all, though, a question from me, which just ties into we just about finished there, Mike. If you're sharing data in the forward works viewer, can you be held accountable for that? And what happens, if it changes and you're not keeping an eye on it? Mike or Angus, do you want to talk about that specifically?
Sure, I'll jump in there. Thanks, Simon. Yeah, it's a great question. We often, there's three things come up when we onboard an organization who's providing data. One is the coarseness of that data. Obviously, the further out from when the work is commencing, the less certainty there is. The other thing is things approach the point of delivery. There's lots of change, lots of flux. And the third question is the liability. If things change, am I on the hook for anything? And we've built quite a robust policy and legal framework around the Forward Works viewer that clearly disclaims the fact that it's an environment for sharing your best intentions under a best endeavors model, recognizing that the real world means that things change and people only know what they know in time. So our tagline for the Forward Works view, it's creating reasons for conversations that lead to better collaboration. And if people enter into the spirit of things, it's best to have information that you can respond to, coordinate over and collaborate with than an absence of information altogether. So it's quite a safe environment to share things in. And hopefully there's lots of testimonies of where people have been able to share things, even though there's a lack of certainty and even though that things flux and change close to the point in time, but it still delivers much, much better outcome than an absence of data overall.
Thank you, Angus. We do have a question from the audience, and just for everybody else in the audience, if you didn't catch my message in the chat earlier, you can use the Q&A function to pose your questions to our speakers, and it is helpful if you provide your name and organisation, giving a little context to the speakers so that they can answer your question most effectively. So going to the question from Sandy Fong at NZTA. Sandy says, great initiative with the current focus on increasing efficiency. Is there something like a cost-benefit analysis that looks at the quantified benefits of end-to-end management? This is probably back for you, Angus.
Yeah, maybe I'll just jump in quickly. So thanks for that, Sandy. Hey, for the whole end-to-end corridor management, we don't have what we consider a business case that would provides the details around that. However, we have a very robust business case for the underground asset register. It's predicated on overseas jurisdiction experience, and we've normalized it to a New Zealand context. So there's a piece of public-facing business case in there. And for the Forward Works view, we have a whole host of anecdotal evidence savings. We've heard a few from Tracy, and we've collected a whole heap of qualitative evidence from around the country. However, we know that doesn't cut the mustard when it comes to an organisation to say what's in it for us, how does this return? What we do have across both products is clear benefit stream. So we can share that with you, and we're happy to share that with anybody if they're interested. What we haven't done is monetize those benefit streams into, say, a 3-year spend or a 5-year spend. So we're just short of that actual cost benefit, in a business case context that everybody would understand. So with lots of information, but not an end-to-end business case as such.
Thank you, Angus. I have another question as well. I'm just going back to Nick's presentation. Nick was saying that if the data doesn't match up with what the utilities that the contractors are finding in the ground, they sometimes have difficulty, getting in contact with the owner of the utility. Is there a role for Forward Works viewer in that, or what's the recommended procedure in those cases?
It's a great question.
Yeah. Nick, is that for you or is that for Angus again?
Probably as you've phrased the question, probably for Angus, since it's a Forward Works viewer question. I do believe that through the corridor management system that we need to improve on that. So, if there's a tool that can improve this communication, and, my experience from the UAR, that was one tool that could do it, that certainly will help to remove some of the barriers. But I'll let Angus answer the direct question.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Yeah, just to jump in. So the underground asset register actually has features that allow site observations to be created when the ground is open. And one of the thesis with the underground asset register is we only open the corridor every once in a while. And so if we capture what we see when we do it, then that can go back into a repository, and it's another data point or a point of information that, together with good practice such as potholing and other types of investigation, will over time build a rich picture of what's under that ground. And what we're doing, we've been working with Wellington City. They've been adding conditions or reasonable conditions to their corridor access permits about capturing that information when the ground is open. And again, we're still early in that journey, but the concept of saying, hey, what can we report back we think is really useful, and we've built the functionality to do that. And we've already got examples where we've got assets. When we've excavated, you can see clearly they're clashing, and there's an opportunity to get in and to protect those assets at that point in time. So there's clear benefits being returned.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's great to hear. Yeah, it's not much we can do about what happened historically and where the data doesn't exist or maybe incorrect, but I guess having a solution going forward is always useful. Tracy, a question for you. As a user, as an RCA user, you touched on it a little bit in your own presentation. The kind of the differences in using an internal GIS system versus a ForwardWorks viewer. Do you want to just unpack that a little bit more?
Sure. At the beginning of our ForwardWorks viewer journey, we definitely did have a comprehensive internal program viewer at AT that was map-based, GIS-based. But it had its limitations in the respect that that's fine for presenting an AT view of the world, but we didn't have the ability to surface data from other entities that would be either conflicting or complementing the works that our own maintenance and capital teams were doing. So it's that whole attitude of dig once. And so if someone wants to put cables under the ground at the same time as we're rehabbing a road, that saves the community. So having an internal viewer is grand, but you don't then have a lever to get all of the other organisations to provide their data for you to consume in your internal viewer. The beauty of the ForwardWorks viewer platform is that all happens seamlessly, sort of automatically, and you've got the view of the multi-lateral projects that are going on. Also, I think because it's a national platform, you don't have any hard cuts at jurisdictions because most of our linear assets run through regions. And so you want the ability to see those and how they're going to be impacted in one place. So there is definitely a place for internal GIS viewers, but I think that having the ability to coordinate on a national system has paid huge dividends for Auckland.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, the networks that we're working on are both above ground and visible, but also below ground as well. And each of those flows beyond regional boundaries, don't they? Thank you for that. So in the absence of any more questions from the audience, we'll look to wrap up here, and it just leaves me to say thank you once again to Mike, Angus, Nick, and Tracy for sharing your knowledge and experiences. I can see a few round of applause coming from the audience. So the presentations will be made available to everybody who registered. Good turnout today, and you've kept the audience well, guys. So thanks once again to our speakers, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon, everybody.